So you might be thinking things look a little bit different right now. And let me explain what's been going on over the last few weeks. So if you're not aware, I've had a streamathon going over on my Twitch channel, as well as live on my previous YouTube channel, not the SGMS channel, but the one that I was on before. And this has been the streamathon where everything keeps breaking. So my camera broke. The sensor in the camera just went out. Everything was green with like blue lines in it and everything. That's not great. And not an easy repair or a cheap repair either. I'm currently using a cheap webcam that I had sitting around, which the video quality on this isn't super great. I'm not super happy with it. It does have a much wider like viewing area, so you can see a lot more of the random crap that I have in my room now. But that happened. One of my lights literally caught fire. I don't know if you can see that on this webcam very well or not, but midstream, all of a sudden there was the profound smell of electrical burning in the room as one of my lights went out. So that was fun to react to in real time, trying not to let my light burn my house down. So I had to get some new lights, which is also part of why things look a little bit different right now. Had a monitor die. My router is trying to die now as well. It's been a rough few weeks as far as tech goes around here, but we got some stuff to talk about. So let's get into it. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player and so on. My name is Devilor, and today, we should probably talk about that whole add-on apocalypse that's happening right now. Essentially, if you have somehow not yet caught wind of this, in the Midnight Alpha currently, add-ons are broken in such a way that most of the combat add-ons that you may previously have known about, such as, weak auras, DBM, etc., those just don't work. Blizzard has fundamentally changed the way that information is presented to those add-ons in such a way that they cannot function the way that they used to. And while we knew this was coming eventually, I don't think most people, I certainly was not expecting this to be something that came as soon as midnight. It's something that Blizzard has been talking a bunch about, how they want to make sure that the base game has enough functionality built into it already so you don't feel like you need these add-ons. In fact, sometimes even going as far as saying you wouldn't necessarily even miss them per se. So this feels pretty soon compared to the amount of work that is still clearly needing to be done to bring the base UI up in line with what add-ons have at least previously mostly been capable of. We know that there's some functionality that they're going to want to not be accessible to these to the new functionality. There's some things that they don't want it to be able to predict exactly who a thing is going to land on if it's not meant to be predicted and so on. There's some stuff that they don't want these add-ons to be able to do anymore, but there's a lot of really basic stuff that these add-ons, like weak auras especially, were previously used for that is currently not possible through the built-in cooldown manager and other features that Blizzard's been adding in Midnight. Now, before I continue with this, I do want to make one quick note, which is just that there's a strong possibility that things as they are right now is not quite as scorched earth as it will actually end up being, for two reasons. One is Blizzard is clearly positioning this in such a way to where and they've even come out and said this, they want to kind of engineer a situation where you can't use the add-ons so that they can then start getting feedback on what's still missing. We're going to talk about that more here in a second. But the other thing is that while they have fundamentally changed the way that information is presented, hi, Nikki. You're coming all the way over here. Okay. You don't fit up there. Come sit in my lap. That's fine. While they have fundamentally changed the way that information is presented to these add-ons, they haven't entirely completely removed a lot of it. I don't know the ins and outs and details of that. I would have to be an add-on developer to really be able to get my hands on it and understand exactly what's different about the way that they're presenting information now. But what I do know is that they're at least still presenting information. They're presenting that there is information to these add-ons. They're essentially putting it in a little black box and saying there's some information in here, but we're not going to tell you exactly what it is. But that does mean there might still be potential ways for add-ons to take that information and display it in different ways. Nikki's just all over the place right now. They might be able to take that information and display it in different ways, which might make up some of the shortcomings that we're currently seeing. So I know that a lot of add-on developers are currently in the Midnight Alpha, and they're trying to wrap their heads around what's going on and try to figure out what, if anything, can be done to restore some of the functionality that those add-ons previously had available to them, especially when it comes to things like visual customization and so on. So there's a strong possibility that add-on developers will be able to still do something, even if it's not to the extent that they were previously able to. And there's also hopefully the existence of additional changes. Fingers crossed. Like I said, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Hope for additional changes to come to the base UI that will help shore up that difference a little bit. And I have to say, as much as I understand Blizzard's approach here and how they're kind of coming at this from the perspective of let's remove everything and see what's missing. Let's take everything away and then see what sort of stuff we haven't implemented yet that we know that we need to. I understand that approach. I still don't really like it, especially this soon. And especially given how little of that is already available through the in-game cooldown manager and so on. And the biggest reason for that is a lot of the stuff that's still needed is honestly kind of obvious. Like the cooldown manager in particular is still missing a ton of what I would consider mandatory functionality. And this is feedback they've been getting ever since they first rolled it out. They've done a little bit. You can now customize a little bit more on where you want specific things. And you can move things around a little bit more, and you can hide different things from what's showing up in your preset lists and so on. But it's still, especially when it comes to like the progress bars, for example, there's a lot of things you just can't put in a progress bar, some of which is crazy to me that you can't put it over there. They've kind of kept that completely separate from the other like just chunks of icons that they have available. So you still can't really make the progress bars into anything that's remotely useful. And even if you could, you can still only have one list of progress bars, whereas at least as far as I'm aware, most people that I know, if you have progress bars for things, you might have like your offensive stuff next to your player target, and then your defensive stuff next to your player frame. So that way you can quickly at a glance see if you still have a defensive cooldown up or not. Like, especially as a tank, that's just something that I consider to be so important. The ability to keep track of, okay, how long is left on my divine protection? Okay, it's about to wear out. Now it's time to use another cooldown and so on. Being able to, at a glance, in a hurry, look and see that information without having to sift through, like, also there's a progress bar over there, but is that Avenging Wrath? Is that my hero talent ability? Like, what is that thing that's over there in that progress bar? Not having to sift through that and just see, oh, there's still a bar there. It's got about this much on it. I know what that means then. And being able to look back to what's actually happening around your character instead of having to analyze that information. That to me seems super important. And I think when it comes to just general player trust in this whole thing, the ability for players to believe in the first place that Blizzard's actually going to be able to deliver on this whole stated goal of getting to a point where you just don't need the add-ons anymore, where the base game is providing all the information that it historically has not in a way that you can actually digest and understand as you're playing the game. They really needed to put their best foot forward with this, and they have not. Coming out with this in that perspective of, well, let's put out a crappy version of this that we know isn't done yet so that we can see what's not done about it and then try to fix some more stuff up from there. It needed to come out feeling almost there and then get that feedback to push it across the line. Instead, it came out nowhere near what players are going to be expecting out of this. And it just seems like so far to go to get to where it's going to need to be for players to actually accept and say, okay, I understand now, Blizzard. I see you did it. You pulled it off. Like, that distance between where it is now and where it needs to be is so high that it feels impossible. Maybe if Blizzard had the reputation that they had 20 years ago, that might be something that people would be more willing to believe on this whole thing. But there have been a lot of pretty large-scale missteps that have occurred over the last 10 years or so that still leaves a little bit of a sour taste in people's mouths when it comes to believing whether or not Blizzard's actually going to deliver on what they're saying they're going to deliver on. Things like the whole pull the ripcord thing back during Shadowlands. Things like, oh no, it's going to be fine. We're going to do all this pruning in Warlords of Draenor, and you're not even going to miss those abilities because you hate them and you hate using them. And it turns out they pruned a whole bunch of abilities that people loved and wanted to continue using, and have had to bring a lot of that back. There's been so many cases in the past that are still in players' memories of situations where Blizzard has said and done things in a very similar way to what they're doing right now and not followed through with it in a satisfactory way for a lot of these players, that coming into this from the approach of, we're just going to put out a bad version, knowing that it's bad, knowing that it still needs a lot of work, and we'll just fix it up from there. Like, that's just not something that I think players are ready to accept. And just to be clear, that has very little to do with whether or not they can actually accomplish it. I know they can accomplish it. They're a very capable development team. They are very much able to pull this off. And they're very much able, they have the capabilities to be able to produce the end result that players are expecting and hoping for, and that Blizzard themselves have been saying is what they want to do. They're very much capable of that. The question is there going to be a point here where Blizzard says, okay, that's good enough, ship it, we're done, and what Blizzard decides is good enough is not what players feel is good enough? Because even looking past the current state of things like the cooldown manager, things like the boss timeline and so on, these things that are there, it's good that these are being added into the game. These things are being added. Even looking past their current state and looking to what a future state of these might be, it just feels so far to go to be able to get to where a player might actually feasibly sit down and say, yeah, okay, I don't miss weak auras. I don't miss DBM. I don't need those anymore because this thing in the game is just as good. I do want to note, I actually really like what they're doing with the boss timeline thing. I think that has the potential to be really good. I'm really excited about seeing that one in action. I haven't yet had a chance to really mess with it in the Midnight Alpha, but I'm really excited to see where that turns up. I think that could be really good, but at the same time, I think the cooldown manager could be really good. It's going to come down to specific choices that are made in terms of implementation, how it's presented to the player, what customization options the player is given, and so on. Because the reality is there is a pretty significant gap between the point where a development team might say, okay, that's good enough. We've done the work that we need to create a baseline functionality that essentially meets players' needs, and the point where a player will look at this and say, not only are my needs met, but I actually like this. I actually think this is a good thing, and this was a healthy change for the game. And I don't need the add-ons anymore. I don't miss the add-ons. I don't feel like, man, remember how much better this was back when you could have a weak aura that just put like a tiny little line when you had this thing and put a big bar when you had this other thing. Like, I think there very much need to be some more changes, some very significant changes, and a lot of development work put into these sort of first-party in-game version of these add-ons that I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried that Blizzard is not going to be able to or even want to put all of that stuff in game to the point where players are going to look at this and say, okay, well, the game is just worse now. I've mentioned a few things already, especially talking about the cooldown manager. And honestly, most of this comes down to stuff that I feel should fall under the purview of the cooldown manager, just to be clear. But things like I say, being able to have multiple sections of each type. So you can say, I want to put this cluster, I want to put just my defensive cooldowns over here so I can see them at a glance. Like I want to put just my offensive cooldowns over here. Right now, if you want them to be, you can kind of sort of do that by moving them between like the tracked buffs and the other section, but then the functionality changes on a bunch of them. I would like to be able to have a fully separate section for, I want this group of icons to appear over here. I want this group of icons to appear over here. I would like to be able to have the same thing for progress bars, because for some abilities, just having a little icon with a little clock that goes around is not good enough. I need to know precisely like how many seconds right now, down to the half of a second or less, how many milliseconds essentially is left on my defensive cooldown so that I can line up my usage of the next one with right as that last one is about to fall off to make sure that I'm keeping these defensive cooldowns available or active during high damage periods. These are the sorts of things that are necessary for certain roles, especially tanks. Like I said, it's really important to have that sort of functionality, and having to sift through a list of, okay, yeah, well, you actually had this proc activate, so that's up now over here as well, and that sort of thing. Like you could disable that, but maybe you also want to be tracking that proc as well. Could you move it to another section? There's a lot of stuff that's just not really possible with the way that the cooldown manager works right now, that comes down to just the ability for a player to recognize quickly at a glance what's actually going on. I keep sidetracking myself. What I'm basically trying to say right now is I think some of the biggest things that the cooldown manager needs, it needs much more customization in terms of what goes where. You can kind of move icons around right now and you can hide certain icons, but you should be able to put anything that you can put in the icon sections. You should also be able to put that, well, not anything. There's some things that you wouldn't want to, but the vast majority of things that you can put in your cooldown section, there should also be something that goes for that in the progress bars, especially if it's an active effect with a duration. Anything that you have that's an active effect with a duration needs to be able to put in a progress bar. That's not currently possible. You need to be able to have multiple different versions of each one of these things. So you can set, if you were able to say, okay, make a new progress bar section, put it over here. Here's what I want listed in that. Make another new progress bar section, put it over here. Here's what I want listed in that. and then be able to individually adjust the appearances of those inside the edit mode. So that you can say, this one needs to be real big because I'm only putting my super important like giga abilities in this one, and I need to know exactly when those are falling off. And this one over here is just some procs. So I just want to know when these procs are active and have a little progress bar for them. That's the sort of functionality that's real easy, like base level stuff that you can do. You can create those on your own with only a limited understanding of weak auras very, very easily. This is the sort of thing that the cooldown manager needs to make available to players. What I'm worried is going to happen is that Blizzard will start to do some of those things. I'm fully confident that they will continue to add and build off of the stuff that's already there. They've said that that's what they're planning to do. I am fully confident that they're not going to say that we're going to keep adding stuff to it and then just literally do nothing. I don't think literally do nothing is in the cards for this. What I'm worried about is that the additional work that they decide to do ends up being not enough. It ends up being something that like, okay, yes, you've added a little bit here, you've added a little bit there. For some reason, it took 2 whole patch cycles to get around to it, but you've added a little bit here and there. And it still does not have the full functionality that I wanted out of something that can provide information like this. And what will happen is, what I'm worried about will happen is they will get to a point where they say, okay, yeah, that's good enough. Stop working on that. Go do something else. Take those developers, put them on another, because this is all like the UI team that's working on this. And UI is one of the biggest things that takes up a lot of design time and development time, because every new feature that's added, literally everything that happens in the game in some way or another requires some element of UI work to be able to implement. So they might, like they're going to get this big backlog of work that the UI team needs to handle. They're going to say, okay, you've gotten that good enough, move over to work on these other tasks instead now. And the result will be that this good enough never quite becomes great. And it could still be the sort of thing that they continue to add on to in patches and content updates and future expansions and so on. But I'm worried specifically for Midnight that this is going to launch with a subpar experience for players that want to be able to have this information presented to them. They want to be able to they want to be pushing heavy raids. They want to be pushing high mythic plus. Maybe they want to get real serious about delves, and they just really, they want this information in a way that they can react to it appropriately so they can push themselves to whatever their own personal limit is. I'm worried that we're going to get at midnight release a subpar version of these quote unquote in-game add-ons, and that the add-ons that already exist or existed are not going to be able to make up the difference. Because let's be honest, modern WoW for a long time has had a real big issue with returning players feeling kind of lost. And one of the big things that pushes that issue is that there's just a lot going on with classes right now. Now, Blizzard is saying that they're planning to simplify classes. Again, they've done a little bit of this already on the Midnight Alpha. We're going to come back to that topic in a future video because I'm still pretty worried about what that actually ends up meaning. But Blizzard is saying that they're wanting to simplify classes a little bit. And sure, yeah, there's things like the 1-button rotation, but I think a lot of players are just not going to find using the 1-button rotation very fun. That's not really enjoyable. To sit there and just spam one button over and over and over and over and over again. Even if it is technically making the game easier for you to understand, it feels kind of lame for a lot of, like, I would not use this thing. I would be the sort of person who plays poorly instead of using the 1-button rotation, because I'm just going to have more fun playing poorly and doing my rotation wrong than I would having a single button that does all that work for me. That's who I am as a player. And I feel like there's a lot of players who are like that. So I am definitely worried that the returning player experience is going to be not only is this class now complicated and different and changed around dramatically to where I don't understand it from whatever the last time I played was, but on top of that, here's all these systems that I need to understand. Here's whatever's new in the expansion and whatever I missed from previous expansions that I never got around to. And on top of that, I can't have an add-on that simplifies any of that for me or presents this information. Like, as I'm starting to pick through this info, I can't find a way to present that in a way that clicks for me as a player, to where I'm just going to feel extra lost regardless. And yeah, it's possible, like I said, it's possible that the new way that information is being presented to these add-ons, that there's some way that those add-ons can reclaim some of that functionality, at least when it comes to like where things are being placed on the screen and so on. It's very possible that that will turn out to be the case. And weak auras can still exist. It's just taking the information that the cooldown manager is hand feeding to it and letting them present that differently, as opposed to doing all the calculations on its own. That's the sort of environment that I think could actually work out. But if the end result of this is players still want to install add-ons anyway, just to be able to see the information that is supposed to be getting presented to them by the in-game add-ons, that's not what they're trying to do here. And I've also seen some really valid concerns about what this state of things could mean for skill gaps. Because when it comes down to it, presenting information and parsing information and understanding what's going on your screen and what you need to do to react is kind of the core gameplay of World of Warcraft or most MMORPGs. There's stuff happening on the screen. You need to be able to understand what's happening so that you can then make the correct choices on how to respond to that. And one of the biggest skill gaps and skill differentials that happens between high-level players and the mid to lower-level players, or the more casual players, is that extremely good players don't need as much help in that department. They will usually take it anyway because it just makes it easier on them, and then they can pay attention to even more things. But when it comes to reacting to, I have this proc active, that means now it's time for me to push this cooldown so that I do maximum damage and stuff like that. Working through your rotation in such different ways, making sure that you keep this maintenance buff active or this debuff active and so on. When it comes to stuff like that, top level players can do that naturally, just without any issue, for the most part. A lot of players, as you start to go down in terms of skill, and this isn't like a judgment on players, like everyone's different, people react to things in different ways. But as you start to get away from the cutting edge top end guilds and you go lower down the progression path, you start naturally running into a lot more players for whom that is more of an issue. That's more of a difficulty that they have, where they're not as able to readily take information that's just being presented to them however it's being presented, and they need that little bit of extra help to be able to push themselves a little bit further. All in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to get to with this is the concept that a really good player, a really solid top-end player, will still be able to be a really solid top-end player by leaning on those innate skills that they have to parse all that information in a hurry. A lesser skilled player is going to have significantly more difficulty in an environment where that information is not being parsed in a easily and readily digestible format, so that they can easily tell exactly what's going on and go, oh, I need to push this button now because I see this proc just came up, or my defensive cooldown is about to fall off, so I need to line up another one. When you start getting to a point where it gets harder for those players to understand the information that the game is telling them, even if it is actually telling them to it, or telling it to them, it's going to mean that players of lower skill levels, that gap will expand dramatically. The top end players will still be just as much top end players as they have always been. The mid to low tier players are just going to feel lost. And what those players are capable of versus what the top end players are capable of, that gap is going to get very large. This is why it's so important to me, and why I keep harping on about things like presenting information in a way that the player can digest it, because previously, a player of pretty much any skill level who set up their UI in such a way that they can see what's happening and they know what's going on is capable of much more than they would have been if that information was harder for them to find. Like finding information, parsing that information. Like I said, that's pretty much the core of World of Warcraft gameplay. So when you make that harder for someone who isn't as good at watching 1,000 little debuff icons showing up, or working around whatever idiosyncrasies the UI that they've just been presented with is actually giving them, when you start to get into players who need that little bit of extra help, or they're just going to fall even further behind, well, they're just going to fall a little bit further behind. Anyway, this is very much a case where I hope I'm wrong. I hope what actually happens here is Blizzard looks at a lot of the initial feedback. They dedicate all of the necessary resources to making sure that all of these core functionality pieces that are currently missing actually make it into their in-game add-ons, and actually make it into things like the cooldown manager in such a way where I look back on this video later and I'm like, I was worried about absolutely nothing. I would love for that to be the outcome, and I'm hoping that's what ends up happening. I'm just concerned because I know how game development tends to be, and oftentimes what actually happens is you look at something and say, I can't do everything that I wanted to do, so I'm going to have to just package together what I can get done and put that out. And that could very well mean that what we end up receiving when Midnight launches is just not good enough. And while I understand Blizzard's approach here in let's put out what we know isn't good enough so that we get the feedback we need about what about it isn't good enough, I understand that. a lot of the feedback that they need on that is stuff that people have already been talking about. Pretty like I've talked about a lot of this stuff already on this show in the past. A lot of the whole list of things that I went through earlier is all stuff I've talked about previously on this show. I know I've seen people talking about this all over in the forums and on Twitter and so on. That feedback is being presented already. They were already getting that feedback. And on top of that, like they're very good and capable game developers. They should also be able to look and say, okay, I understand now. This is how people are playing this game. And so this is like, they should be able to look at weak auras and go, that's something that we need to add into this, and have already added it by the point that they started to do this whole peeling back of everything. Like I said, I very much hope that I'm wrong. And I hope that all of these concerns turn out to be nothing. I'm just very concerned. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully this ends up being fine. Blizzard just puts all the effort into this that they need to, and we start seeing that shape up throughout the Midnight Alpha, so that the time Midnight comes out, we're looking at this and saying, okay, yeah, this is actually fine. This is actually good. And then maybe like as a fallback, maybe there's still a potential for add-on developers to be able to add back in that functionality by playing within the new rules that Blizzard has set for what information add-ons are able to actually process. Maybe there's some way that that can all come together that still works out. That's not as ideal, because it still kind of means that you need to install some add-ons, and there's still a significant advantage in terms of getting the information presented in a digestible manner by installing those add-ons. Because the whole goal with this, remember, is to make it so you don't need these add-ons to progress. They're not a significant increase in your capabilities as a player. So if we just come back right around to, well, yeah, there's the in-game cooldown manager and it kind of works, but you should really install weak auras anyway, because the new version of weak auras or whatever other add-on comes up is built in such a way that you can customize these much better, so you can actually tell what's going on with them. Like that means that those mid to low skill players, and even like a lot of the higher skill players at that point, are still going to want to do that anyway, because having that information presented to you in a more digestible manner naturally increases what your capabilities as a player are. It's essentially giving you player power. So that's where I'm at with it right now. Yeah, I think that's about all I have to say on that topic. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you all so much for watching. Sorry about the little gap for a while there with the streamathon going on and everything breaking. It's been difficult for me to get an episode out. But we're back. We're doing this again. It doesn't look very good, but we're doing it again. And I hope you still enjoyed the episode nonetheless. Big shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you all so much for continuing to support the channel. It really, really means a ton. If you have not already, please go check out patreon.com/Devilor. Give it a look. I could use the funds to help replace some of the things that keep breaking. So thank you so much to everyone who's been continuing to support the channel while all this has been going on. If you have any questions that you would like to see answered here on the show, or topics that you'd like me to cover or anything like that, please leave a comment below on YouTube. Or if you are a patron, there's a form you can fill out to get priority on having your question answered here on the show. But I'm going to call it there. Thanks again so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you later.